All the prophecies and all the things that we know are going to be happening at the end relates to those three words. And I think as we go through the sermon here this morning, you'll get a sensitivity that in many, many ways, those three things are being fulfilled, even with us here this morning. Prophecy reveals that end-time powers will limit or stop our ability to worship the way we address God. Noting those translated who will go through the time of trouble, John said in Revelation 7:14, those that are all translated, they're alive around the throne of God. These are they who came out of great tribulation. At the end of time, there's going to be issues about liberty, our liberty, worship liberty. And part of the tribulation will relate to that. Of the Antichrist beast, it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. He will oppress God's holy people, New and Old Testaments. The word overcome means that the Antichrist for a short time will legally win. Adventists have acknowledged this time from the writings of Ellen White as the little time of trouble. We have Jacob's trouble, which is a very short period of time, and then we have the little time of trouble, which appears to be about 3.5 years.
It sounded like Jacob's It sounded like Jacob's trouble comes first.
I see. My wife found I said that backwards. I apologize. Ellen White said at this time, in our land of boasted freedom, religious liberty will come to an end. In the courts of injustice will prevail. The judges will refuse to listen to the reason of those who are loyal to the commands of God. And she's describing the issue of our liberty, our religious liberty at the end of time. Another thought from her writings, we need not marvel at any developments of harm. Those who trample under the unholy feet the law of God have the same spirit as had the men who insulted and betrayed Jesus. Without any compunctions of conscience, they will do the deeds of their father, the devil. These are important statements that she has made and projections into the future for us to understand. You may be aware, it was in the news yesterday, that down in Santa Monica, if they find somebody without a mask, they are going to fine them $500. That's dramatic. That's coercive. That's restrictive in so many, many ways. But it's that kind of spirit that Ellen White is talking about will come to inhibit the expression of our religious experience. For this to occur, something terrible or fearful must penetrate and alter, that should be ER, this country's views relative to religious liberty. From history, one can observe such reversals from a stable culture to chaos. And I give you a few illustrations. The French Revolution, the rise of communist Russia with the Bolshevik Revolution, the mobilization of youth by Mao Zedong to destroy China's glorious past, the seduction of Hugo Chavez of Venezuela that changed the wealth of a free market country to poverty of socialism today. Adolf Hitler's mesmerization of Germany, where millions of people were trained to throw a straight-arm Nazi symbol or salute. These are examples that prophecy suggests this country will sadly experience. And it just doesn't seem like a reality-oriented issue right now, but what we're going through here even this morning is part of that reality at the beginning of it. It is important to know that Hitler remains a major lesson for us today. He believed that if you tell a lie and repeat it long enough, the masses will believe it. He said in the big lie, there's always a certain force of credibility. Because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper state of their emotional nature. And thus, in the primitive simplicity of their minds, they more readily fall victims to a big lie than a small lie. For the grossly impudent lie always leaves traces behind, even after it has been nailed down, a fact which is known to all expert liars in this world and to all who conspire together in the art of lying. His leadership was energized by these convictions. The people were deceived. 60 million people died because of Adolf Hitler. He worshipped at the shrine of wielding evil deceptive power and a mournful reality. Oh, they're becoming a little better. Can you hear me okay? I turned to my notes and, all right, thank you, Dr. Jack. Hermann Rauschenigg met several times with Hitler before the war. He left Nazism to resist its malignant barbarism. In his provocative book, Hitler Speaks, he recalls, Hitler talked a lot about psychology of lying. Hitler told him, what you tell people in the masses, in a receptive state of fanatic devotion, it will remain. A new age of magic interpretation of the world is coming. Interpretation in terms of the will and not of the intelligence. There is no such thing, Hitler said, as truth, either in the moral or in the scientific sense. That's coercion, obviously, what he wanted to do. Today, we colloquially refer to it that's happening in this country as fake news. And I'm sure you have heard that many times. The power of deception is stunning. It has come to America and will soon be used to promote a false worship day. I will illustrate this as we go along here. It is almost unbelievable as to how easily people can be misled and controlled. Tragically, many have limited contact with good, objective news and sources. The more that truth and right are misconstrued, the darker the understanding of what really is. And I emphasize the word is. That's in fact a definition of truth. What is truth? The simplest definition of truth is that which is. And that underscores biblical as well as other kinds of truth. A new reality will soon come when Protestant America demands the Sunday laws. Now, the Bible has much to say about end-time deception. I want to go over a few of the items, and then we're going to go to some of the current issues that we are faced with. Jesus warned the disciples about deception on the Mount of Olives. Take heed that no man deceive you. Matthew 24:4. The psychodynamics of the Olivet Discourse are profound. Christ didn't want future reality to be tarnished with falsehood. He wanted us to have a clear perception of what prophecy was in the future. Man would tinker with the meaning of the future, and basically Jesus was saying, be aware, be careful. Know with precision the facts that require careful Bible study, which really applies to each one of us. Be endowed with spiritual discernment, 1 Corinthians 2:14, which is an absolute necessity for all of us as we study the Bible. Paul, in addressing the Thessalonians regarding Christ's second coming, alerted them and us, don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. Rebellion is already starting to occur, as you will see. A deceiver of unprecedented power will be disclosed, clearly leading a religious rebellion against God's requirements. In writing to Timothy, 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5, Paul additionally noted that in the last days, perilous times would come. He then listed why, among the reasons, people would be without natural affection. Are we seeing that today? Truce breakers, which are deceivers, false accusers, which are liars, and traitors. And we're certainly seeing that today in America with some of the riots that we have. Within these signs, he sadly noted that some of these attitudes and problems will even penetrate the religious world, the church, the Christian world in general. Truth would be altered through mesmerizing compromise. That's what the Sunday laws will stand for. Trustworthy individuals will be very difficult to find. This echoes the biblical record of Satan's modus operandi in an almost unimaginable war in heaven between Michael, Christ, and the angels, and Lucifer, Satan, and his angels. The latter was expelled, as most of you know. He took with him 1/3 of the heavenly host. Now the dragon's tail swept away 1/3 of the stars in heaven and hurled them to the earth. Just to identify what that tail really represents in prophecy, a tail represents deception. Illustrations. Those giant minds, those angelic beings who followed the devil were willfully deceived. The same deceptive tactics used in heaven brought Eve's fall. She was mesmerized by deception. Falsehood enslaves us. It takes us, most will become enslaved to error and fantasy, but call it truth and freedom. We are moving in that direction now, as you will see as we go along. The will be tarnished. Freedom to make and carry out choices is going to be limited. Liberty to identify with and choose God's standards will be an example of what's transpiring. When the COVID pandemic was publicly declared a health issue, restrictions on the lives of people based on computer models were quickly made. Computer models. These barred individuals from going to work except for, quotes, essential services, defined by non-medical workers. At first, people were required to remain at home except for those essential services. Facial masks became a necessity. And I mentioned about Santa Monica, what's going on now, and it's happening in other cities, I understand, in California. Spacing between individuals became mandated. Then Minnesota Governor Tim Walz became one of the first civic leaders to question if worship in churches and synagogues and mosques were really essential. He refuted what President Trump and Attorney General William Barr had said, that worship and assembly were essential, which is obviously constitutionally protected. The Catholic bishops of Minnesota rebelled. Jessica, we'll just wait for 1 moment here. Who's talking? Testing. Testing, there we go. Okay. I might mention, just for fun and passing, one of the reasons I didn't go into surgery, I didn't like to wear a mask. And here I am preaching with a mask on, trying to anyway. The Catholic bishops of Minnesota rebelled. They announced that their churches would open in spite of the law. The COVID-19 restrictions defied reason and science, the Catholic bishops said. They insisted that the governor's arbitrary targeting of religious practices were unjust. This became a standoff between Catholic religious and civic leaders. Unfortunately, the civic leaders won. Sadly, the mandates of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, remain in force. Those guidelines were never scientifically questioned until, in May, 500 physicians wrote President Trump of the harm that COVID restrictions posed, urging that the shutdown be totally ended. What we are now observing is an expression of overarching civil power that micromanages even elements of Christian assembly. Retired Judge Andrew Napolino noted, "The founders of America made the profound and indisputable choice of establishing a government dedicated to liberty over the illusion of safety." Pretty profound. They embedded, and he's quoting still, that choice in the Declaration of Independence in the Constitution. The former states unequivocally that there is no government is legitimate without the consent of the governed, and that the government's principal duty is to secure our rights. The latter, which expressly protects the right to make personal choices, is the supreme law of the land, and thus all our government acts are subordinated to it. The latter, which expressly protects the right to make personal choices, is the supreme law of the land, and thus all governmental acts are subordinate. Stated differently, the governments that have interfered with our well-established rights to go about our daily lives as we see fit, taking chances whenever we cross the street, drink a glass of water, bite into food, sit near a stranger on a train or a baseball game, to go through a green light in our vehicles, have failed their obligation, which is to safeguard our freedoms to take those chances. Interesting, isn't it? And that's from a judge. The latest data suggests that the mortality rate for COVID-19 is not more than the common flu. Because this is a sermon, I'm not going to go through all the details related to that, but that's what the latest data is showing. And the death rates right now are dramatically falling off. Peggy Ryan of the American Thinker quipped recently, a few days ago, "The government claims it is protecting us from the virus with the Constitution in lockdown." Then she asked, "Who is protecting us from the government?" Again, these are all part of a growing mindset that restricts our religious liberty. The dynamics are very profound, what we're experiencing even here this morning. Daniel Webster of the Webster's Dictionary from long ago said this: "There are men in all ages who mean to govern well, but they mean to govern. They promise to be kind masters, but they mean to be masters." Very profound, and that is kind of what we're seeing now. Why are these important to Seventh-day Adventists? Satan puts his interpretation upon events, and they think as he would have them, that the calamities which fill the land are the result of Sunday breaking. That's ahead of us, but it's being talked about now, to be sure. Thinking to appease the wrath of God, that's an assumption. These influential men make laws enforcing Sunday observance. They think that by exalting this false rest a higher and still higher, compelling obedience to the Sunday law, the spurious Sabbath, they are doing God service. An assumption. Those who honor God by observing the true Sabbath are looked upon as disloyal to God. Another assumption, when it is really those who regard them who were themselves disloyal because they are trampling underfoot the Sabbath that was established in Eden. She has another thought that's very good, very profound. Yet this very class put forth the claim that the fast-spreading corruption is largely attributable to the desecration of the so-called Christian Sabbath, and that enforcement of Sunday observance would be greatly improve the morals of society. The morals can be not only a sexual issue, but it also can be the violence that we have seen recently on the streets. Those, once again, that she's discussing are assumptions that the government makes and people in the populace make. These important quotations illustrate a cultural shift that is starting to be demonstrated today with the COVID virus. It demonstrates how a power shift in government can occur in just a few weeks' time. Coercing, restricting, controlling, those are the three issues that religious liberty are going to be curtailed by. It's occurring today in our worship experience. Can you imagine really what's happening here this morning? We're limited time-wise in our worship experience, and we're limited in our communication to some degree because of the mask. There's just a lot of issues, a lot of dynamics that are occurring just here this morning as we worship here together. With growing calamities and violence, moral assumptions will be made that will control our worship experience even deeper. It will be assumed that if we only worship on Sunday, the calamities and moral state of society would be checked. Those issues that Ellen White talks about, again, are not proven scientifically. They are assumptions that people make. And we know that pastors and priests in the Christian world will go along with those assumptions. This will lead to laws and mandates contrary to Scripture. This concept of an assumed value on restrictions and the value of control over moral choices is an inevitable outcome from what we are observing today. Incidentally, Ellen White talks about 5 different kinds of Sunday laws, and I just urge you to really study that out carefully. It begins with the Sunday law of light, L-I-T-E, that's my term, and then it moves into the enforcement phase, and then there's other stages that occur, and the final one is the death decree. Some individuals are recognizing the dynamics of what's happening to religious liberty. I want to read for you a couple of these quotations. Son of the late Billy Graham, Franklin Graham, sounded the alarm regarding COVID-19. He said recently, it's all about control. Then he warned the restriction of our rights may not be temporary. He also continued, but we also need to be cautious before we say yes to every ban proposed and agree to anything that we think might help protect us from the virus, to make sure that we're not letting go of some of our religious rights. Our response to the coronavirus pandemic would greatly affect our future, could greatly affect our future and our freedoms. Conservative columnist Peter Hitchens is one of the growing number of British journalists suggesting that the government's policies on the coronavirus is doing more harm than good. Hitchens was deeply concerned about the unprecedented curves on liberties, which he concluded were neither a proportionate nor effective answer to the pandemic. Jewish scholar David Horowitz wrote in a book, Dark Agenda, The War to Destroy Christian America. He's Jewish, but he's talking about Christian America, that seculars want to turn this nation into a godless heathen society where religion has no role. The sanctity of the individual accountability, and equality are anathema to secularists. One of the largest files, and I collect articles every morning from the internet, one of the largest files that I have, they're electronic files, is on the restriction of religious liberty. It's this mindset that is going against the things that we cherish. Now, looking at the curtailment of religious liberty, perhaps two Christians, the insightful view of U.S. Attorney General William Barr relating to the current barriers to assembling a church bears attention. William Barr is Roman Catholic, but he's very sensitive to the issues of religious freedom and liberty. This is what he said. Militant secularists across America long have charged that religious people are imposing their views on them. I feel today religion is being driven out of the marketplace of ideas, and there is an organized militant secular effort to drive religion out of their lives. To me, the problem today is not that religious people are trying to impose their views on non-religious people. It is the opposite. It's that militant secularists are trying to impose their values on religious people, and they're not accommodating the freedom of religion of people of faith. Very profound. You're probably aware of another issue about things that affect the Adventist Church from the Supreme Court recently, and actually all Christian churches. June 15, 2020, the Supreme Court took judicial liberty to enact a new law by adding sexual orientation and gender identity to the 1964 Civil Rights Act as a new protected class. Dissenting Justice Alito pointed out that the majority went too far in calling the decision a brazen abuse of our authority. He continued, the Supreme Court exists to interpret the laws, not to make laws. In a bizarre twist, SCOTUS makes the assumption, and just notice what's happening in the legal center of the United States, that sex is assigned at birth, but gender is a choice. Can you imagine the twisting thinking that's happening from these attorneys? That is what they now want to protect, that choice. This will have far-reaching consequences regarding bathrooms, lockers, shower rooms, schools, women's sports, continued Justice Alito. Making it fearful, including hiring people in our denomination. They will have to be careful that they don't use gender discrimination when they hire workers. Making it fearful, he noted, is the possibility that college housing, students of different biological sexes, could be required to room together. The American Family Association, Concerned Women for America, and the Family Research Council have spoken out against this battering ram that crushed Christianity. Well, a few thoughts to ponder. Depraved individuals brought God's wrath to a corrupt world over 4,000 years ago. Only 8 people were saved. Christ is returning soon. Wickedness will be checked and destroyed. Revelation 6, 15 through 17, and 2 Thessalonians 4, 13 to 18. As helpless and discouraged are these defiant moves against Christianity today. What we're seeing and what we're experiencing really is a sign of the end time. Distinctly. We must be ready as Seventh-day Adventists to accommodate but not compromise. Crucial to the control, to the coercion, and to the restrictions that are coming upon us. The demoniacs of AVANSDA, dwelling in the place of graves, in bondage to uncontrolled passions and loathsome lust, represent what humanity would become if given up to satanic jurisdiction. Satan's influence is constantly exerted on men to control the mind and incite to violence and crime. He darkens the intellect and debases the soul. Whenever men reject the Savior's invitation, they are yielding to the influence of Satan. Multitudes in the home, in business, and even in the church are doing this today. Because of this, violence and crime overspreading the earth, and moral darkness enshrouds the inhabitants of men. Satan leads men to worse and worse evils, till utter depravity and ruin are the result. The only safeguard against his power is the presence of Jesus. Before men and angels, Satan has been revealed as man's enemy and destroyer, Christ as man's friend and deliverer. We are in the process of little by little beginning to see real Satan taking over the minds and decisions and thoughts of individuals. And when we see the freedoms of others being restricted, that is a sign that they are projecting and assuming their values, mostly secularist values, on other individuals. Well, I want to end on a positive note. A few thoughts. At such a time as this pandemic began, 50% of Americans have become more serious about their loyalties to God. That's good news. I'm happy about that. 30% feel that we are approaching the end of time. That's also good news. When that occurs, what does that mean in society? That means when we witness for Jesus Christ, people will be more readily available to accept the thoughts that we present about his gospel. So God is using all kinds of things at the very end of time to sensitize people, especially in needing a power beyond themselves. And part of what we are experiencing here in this country, here this morning in our little worship experience, is the issue that God is going to permit these kind of things to help us to sense we need him more. We need a power greater than him. The fact that they are looking upward helps their minds to be more receptive to biblical truth. That's good news. Add to that the latter rain and the final work with a loud cry. Everything will move forward to help finish the gospel message at the end. Now this is just very brief. I wasn't sure how much time I would have. When I came here, I thought it would be quite short. But I just hope you see what is transpiring, the dynamics today in society, in this country. It's a restriction in many, many ways of religious liberty. And it's a first stage to deal with those restrictions that may affect even the day that we're worshiping on. Let's bow our heads in prayer to close. Our Heavenly Father, it's good that we can have insight into some of these issues and realize that we're tiptoeing into an area that will require a lot of commitment to you and no compromise with what's truth or what is right. Father, I just pray for this little group here this morning that your Spirit will strive with them, and that with some of these issues there will be a deep desire to be closer to your side, be closer with you as a friend, a caring friend. Lord, give us your Holy Spirit. Give us understanding. Give us a sense of the joy of what it means to be fully like you, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. precious name of Jesus. Amen.
It's just yes. It's like it's only Should we do anything else? So we're done. We're done.
You don't require one. For those who
Are you guys closing prayer? Or?
that was
Closing that online.
Thank you so much.